Hello, welcome back. Today in this tutorial we are going to see how we can create an MCP client using Embabel framework. So basically we are going to create an Embabel agent that will connect and interact with the File Operations MCP server, and whenever user sends the command via REST APIs like create a new file, edit an existing file, delete a file, our Embabel agent will perform the required task with the help of File Operations MCP server and send the response back to the user. Now when it comes to our File Operations MCP client, we are going to build an Embabel agent and we will expose one REST API which user can call and specify what kind of file operation they want to perform. For example, user can create a new file with the specified content, user can read an existing file, or user can overwrite an existing file with the new content, or user can even delete the files that are available on our local system. So this is how the overall request flow will look like. Whenever user needs to perform any kind of file operation, they will simply call a REST API within which they will specify the command stating what kind of operation that they want to perform. Once the user has sent the request, it will be handled by our controller. Then controller will forward the request to the Embabel agent. Then Embabel agent will analyze the command which is present inside the request body to understand the intent of the request. Then the agent tries to extract the information like the file name and the content of the file. Then it tries to determine what kind of operation user wants to perform, like creating a new file, reading an existing file, and so on. So based on that, it will try to call the appropriate MCP tool which is exposed by the File Operation MCP server. And once the required operation has been performed by the MCP server, it will return the result back to our Embabel agent. Then Embabel agent will return the result back to the user in the form of REST response. Now when it comes to our application, it is going to be the Spring Boot based application. The name of our application will be Embabel MCP Client File Operations. At the very top, we will have the Spring Boot main class. Then we will have one agents package containing one class named as Smart File Operations Agent. So this is the agent that we are going to create using an Embabel framework. Also, it will contain the main logic to fulfill the request, which means our agent can understand the commands that are sent by the user in the form of natural language. Also, it can invoke the tools that are exposed by the MCP server. Then we will have the config package within which we will have one class named as configure open router models. Now this class will contain the LLM beans that we have created for configuring the LLM models that are offered by the open router platform. Then we will have the file operations tool config. It will contain the logic to connect to the MCP server. Also, we are going to create the tools groups inside this class that can be used by the Embabel agent. Then we will have one controller package containing file operations controller class. Now this class contains the REST API that can be utilized by the user for sending the request and for receiving the response. Then we will have the DTO package containing set of DTOs that will be used for the request and response. Then we will have the application.yml containing the basic configuration related to our application as well as the configuration related to the MCP server that we are going to connect. Then we will have the pom.xml containing basic configuration related to the project. Now we will go through our Spring Boot project starting with the pom.xml. At the very top you will notice we are making use of Spring Boot version 3.5.8. When it comes to Java, we are making use of version 21. And for Embabel, we are making use of version 0.3.1 snapshot version, which is the latest version available at the time of recording this video. And if you are looking for the stable version, it is 0.3.0. Coming to the dependencies section, first we have added the dependency for Spring Boot Starter Web, which will help us to create the REST APIs. Then we have added the Spring Boot Starter Actuator dependency. This will be required while configuring the models that are offered by the Open Router platform. Then we have added the Embabel Agent Starter dependency, This will help us to create the agents using Embabel framework. Then we have added the Embabel Agent Starter OpenAI dependency. Now, earlier I mentioned we are going to make use of the free models that are offered by the OpenRouter platform. Now, the models that are offered by the OpenRouter platform are compatible with the OpenAI standards. That is why we have added the Starter OpenAI dependency. Then we have defined the two repositories for Embabel release as well as snapshot, which will bring the required artifacts from the Embabel repositories. Now coming to application YML, at the very top we have defined the name of our application. Then we have configured the port on which our application, or we can say our Embabel agent, will start. Then we have configured the default LLM which will be used by the Embabel. In our case, we have used the DeepSeek 3.1 free model which is offered by the OpenRouter platform. Then we have defined the configuration related to the MCP client using the Spring AI properties. So it will start with the Spring AI MCP client. Here we are defining the MCP client with name Embabel MCP Client File Operation. Then we have defined the version and the type of MCP client. Then we have defined the configuration related to our MCP server. Now coming to the Spring Boot main class, which is Embabel MCP Client File Operations application. This is our standard Spring Boot main class within which we have added this annotation @enable agents, which will scan for the agents that we have defined inside our application and register them with the Embabel framework. Now coming to the configuration package. In our case, we are going to make use of the free models that are offered by the OpenRouter platform, for which we have this class configure OpenRouter model. So this is the Spring Boot configuration class, which is extending the OpenAI compatible model factory class. So since the models that are offered by the OpenRouter are compatible with the OpenAI standards, that is why this particular class is extending the OpenAI compatible model factory. Now inside this class, we need to specify the configuration related to the OpenRouter platform, also the models that we are going to use. So when it comes to the OpenRouter configuration, inside the constructor, we need to specify the base URL for OpenRouter. Then we need to specify the endpoint for chat completion. Also, we need to specify the OpenRouter API key. Now this API key will come from the environment variable, and inside this environment variable, we need to specify our OpenRouter API key. Then we need to pass the instance of the observation registry. Now this observation registry instance is coming from the Spring Boot actuator dependency that we have added inside the pom.xml. Now when it comes to configuring the models that are offered by the OpenRouter, here we need to create the instance of type LLM. So I will showcase you one example. Same can be utilized for configuring the different models. For example, we are making use of DeepSeek version 3.1, for which we have created an instance of OpenAI compatible LLM, within which we have specified the model ID which will come from the OpenRouter platform. Then we have specified the pricing per token, which is 0.0 in our case for both input and output tokens, since we are making use of free models that are offered by the OpenRouter. Then we have configured the name of the provider, and then we have specified the knowledge cutoff date. So in this way, we can configure any number of the models that are offered by the OpenRouter platform. Now coming to the file operations tool config class. Now this class is important. Inside this configuration class, we need to create the MCP tools group, which will contain the set of tools that can be utilized by our Embabel agent. Now in order to create the MCP tool group, we need the information about the MCP client that we have inside our application. So if we go to application.yml, here you will notice we have defined one MCP client with name Embabel MCP Client File Operation. So the information about this client will be stored inside this MCP sync client. And once we have this information, we can create the instance of MCP tool group, for which we have this method file operation MCP tool group. If we expand this method, here you will see we are creating an object of type MCP tool group. Inside this object, we need to specify certain configuration, like first we need to provide the description for our tool group. Here you will notice we have provided a description like file system operation including CRUD via MCP. Then we have defined the role file operation MCP tool group. Then we have given the provider name. In our case, we have just given the name as file operations provider. Then we have given the name to the MCP tool group, which is file ops tools group. Then we have specified the permission. Now our file operation MCP server will work with the resources or files that are available on our local system, due to which we have given the permission of host access. Then we need the MCP client, which will come from here. Now, in order to configure what all tools will be available inside this tool group, we have one predicate function. So in our case, we are only registering the tool that contains the keywords like file, createFile, readFile, editFile or deleteFile inside the name of the tools that are exposed by our MCP server. So this particular tool group will contain only tools that has these keywords inside their name. So once the tool group has been defined, now this tool group can be utilized by our Embabel MCP agent. Now in order to create our Embabel agent, we have this package named as agents, within which we have the smart file operations agent class. Inside this class, we are going to create our Embabel agent using the various annotations that are offered by the Embabel framework. So in order to declare it as agent, we are making use of @agent annotation, within which we have given the name for our agent as well as the other metadata like description and version. Now our agent can perform the actions as well as it will try to achieve the end goal. So the end goal that we are trying to achieve is our agent should be able to process the request that are sent by the user related to the file operations. And in order to denote that, we have these two annotation @action and the @achieves goal. When it comes to @action, this denote what kind of action this agent can perform. So here we have given the description. It can process natural language file operation request and execute file operations. And in order to define the end goal, we have this @achieves goal, within which we have given the description that it can understand users natural language and execute the appropriate file operation. Now one thing to note here is our agent can make use of the different tools that are exposed by the file operations MCP server, and in order to denote that, we have this attribute named as tools group, within which we need to specify the name that we have defined inside the configuration class. So if we come to the configuration class, here we have defined the role with name file operations MCP tool group, and the same we need to specify it here. So whenever user sends the request and our Embabel agent thinks it needs to utilize the tools that are offered by the file operation MCP server, it can make use of that. Now coming to our method, here we have the two parameters. First one is the file operation request. This is nothing but the request that is sent by the user containing the command. And then we have the operation context. This is provided by the Embabel framework. With the help of the operation context, we can utilize the AI capabilities that are offered by the Embabel. Now once we have the request, we need to send this request to the LLM so that it can perform the required operation related to the file. For this, we are making use of the operation context. Then we are calling the .ai method. Then we are specifying the LLM, which in our case we are making use of the default LLM, which is DeepSeek 3.1. And then we are calling this method create object if possible, within which we are sending the prompt for the LLM. Also, we are requesting the LLM to give us the structured response as per this class, which is file operation response. So for prompt, we have defined the prompt here. Here we have defined the prompt like you are a file operation assistant based on the command which user has sent. Perform the required operation like read, create, edit or delete. Also, if required, you can make use of these tools like createFile, readFile, deleteFile and so on, and return the response with the proper metadata. So this is the prompt that we have defined. And when it comes to the structured output, this is the Java record that we have created, file operations response. If you see, this Java record contains few of the fields like message containing the final message from LLM, the flag that we have defined, whether the operation was successful or not, what kind of operation it was, like create, read, edit or delete, and the metadata about the file, which is nothing but another Java record containing the metadata fields like the file name, exact file path, file size, when the file was created or modified, what is the file content, whether the file is deleted successfully or not, and if there are any errors that will be present inside this particular field. Now, once the LLM has processed the request, it will send the response in this format, file operation response. We will simply return it back. Now we have only defined the agent. Now we need to create the REST endpoint, which can be utilized by the end user for sending the request to this particular agent. For this, we have this controller class, file operations controller. Here you will see it is the REST controller. The base path for our controller is API v1 files. Inside this, we are only creating one endpoint for accepting the command from the user. This is going to be the post endpoint. We have created one method, execute file operation. This particular endpoint will accept the request from the user, for which we have created this Java record named as file operation request containing the command. Once we have the request from the end user, we need to forward this request to our Embabel agent so that it can perform the required operation related to files. And in order to invoke the agent programmatically, we have this class named as agent invocation. Here we are making use of the builder pattern, within which we have specified the agent platform. Agent platform is nothing but it provides the runtime for our agent. Also, it manages the life cycle for all the agents that we have inside our application. So we have specified the agent platform, and this agent platform is injected with the help of constructor injection. And then we have specified the process option. So with the help of process option, we can log additional information, like we can log the LLM response. We can see the prompts that we have sent to the LLM agent. Also, we can see the planning that the Embabel framework is performing behind the scenes. So here you will see we are creating an instance of verbosity, and once we have the verbosity instance, we are specified it inside the process option, and once the process options are ready, we are specifying it here. And then we are specifying that we need the response as per this class, which is the file operation response, which we have already covered. And once we have the instance of agent invocation, we are simply invoking our agent by passing the request that is sent by the user. And once the response is available, we are simply returning it back to the end user. So this is the overall code that we have written for our MCP client. Now, in order to test our MCP client, we need to start our application. But before that, we need to start our MCP server. So we are starting the file operation MCP server. And while starting the file operation MCP server, we need to specify the OpenAI API key, which will contain your Open Router API key. So our MCP server is started. It is exposing 6 tools. Now we will start our MCP client. Same thing we need to perform here. Before starting our application, we need to specify the Open Router API key inside this variable, which is named as OpenAI API key. So we will start our application. So our MCP client will connect to the MCP server that we have started. Now we can test our application. Now, in order to test our application, we need to send the request to this particular endpoint API v1 files. And within the request body, we need to specify the command stating what kind of operation we want to perform. So first we are sending the request to create a new file with name demo.txt, and the content of file will be hello Embabel. So when we will send a request, our MCP client will process the request. Behind the scenes, it will send the request to the Embabel MCP server, and our Embabel MCP server will create a new file with name demo.txt and with content hello Embabel. So when I send the request, this request will go to our new Embabel MCP client, which will forward the request to the Embabel MCP server. So here you will see we have received the request, and at the root of this project, the new file has been created, demo.txt. If we see the content of this file, it is hello Embabel. and the response that we receive from our Embabel agent or MCP client is available here. It contains the file metadata. It contains the message stating the file was created successfully, operation type was create, and the file metadata contains the metadata about the file, where the new file was created, when it was created, what is the file name, and so on. Now let's say we want to read the content of the same file demo.txt. We will send the request. So now when we will send the request, again our request will go to the MCP client, which will forward it to the MCP server, and we should see the response. So here you will see the request has been processed, and if we see the response from our MCP client, we have received the file metadata, the operation type was read, the overall status was successful, and this is the file content. Now if we have to test the override functionality, we will simply send the request to the same endpoint by specifying the command override the content of file demo.txt with the new content hello user. So currently the content of the file is hello Embabel. It will be replaced with the hello user. So now you will notice the content of this particular file will be updated with hello user. So now this request has been fulfilled. So if you see the content of demo.txt, it has been updated with hello user, and we have received the response. Operation type was editFile. The overall operation was successful. And if we see the updated date, it has been updated. Now we will delete this file demo.txt. For this, we have written the command delete the file name demo.txt, and we will send the request. Now the delete request processing has been completed successfully. If you see, the demo.txt is deleted, and also you will see here the delete request was received. And if we see the response from our MCP client, the operation type delete was mentioned. The delete operation is done successfully. Also the metadata about that particular file is written, where the is deleted is set to true. Yeah, that was all regarding how we can create an MCP client using Embabel framework. For this, we have also written one detailed article which you can go through. And the source code that we discussed in this tutorial is uploaded on GitHub. You can check out the source code. Also, you can check out the source code for file operation MCP server and test the same by configuring your Open Router API key. Yeah, so that was all from my end. I hope you found it useful. Thank you.